The Sea of Galilee, or as it is also known, the Sea of Kinseret, is one of my favorite places in the world. I find it to be very beautiful. It's like life-transforming, regenerating. It takes me back to the Scriptures, the Gospels. There's something holy about it for me. It is located in the northern part of Israel, in the Galilee, right on the edge of the Golan Heights. In fact, up until 1967, Israel was on one side, and the other shoreline was Syria. So it's not really all that far across. But what's interesting and unique about it is as you drive across the plains and you come across the valleys towards the Sea of Galilee, you all of a sudden reach an edge and it begins to drop because the Sea of Galilee is 700 feet below sea level. It is the lowest freshwater lake on the face of the earth. Which is significant because if you stand there and you look at it, you have not only a drop in the lake, but you have higher mountains, as we would call them at least there, all the way around it, which is significant because storms can come up from the Mediterranean Sea and flood across the plains and the valleys and hit that area quickly and suddenly and cause the waves to erupt and the rain to come down and storms to occur. It is on the north side of the Sea of Galilee where they have a modern place that Olympic windsurfers train. That's how significant the waves can be on this lake, which isn't real big, but is significantly big enough. So when we read this text, I think of all that, and I think of the storms because I've seen them occur. But when I try to make this text relevant, and of course preaching is always the challenge of, so what? So what does it have to say? So what does it mean? So what implications does it have for us in this time, in this place? How do we make that what we call homiletical leap, that leap from 2,000 years ago today? So this has significance. I thought to myself, well, the mistake we often make is we focus on the storm. We focus on the waves and that Jesus overcame them. And they said, wow, he's got power over nature. Well, we know God has power over nature, but if I preach on that, I got problems. Because I have to ask myself, well, if that's the case and Jesus saves his disciples, why do other people die in storms? Because storms occur all the time and good people die. That's a dilemma. So what is Mark talking about? What does Mark really want us to focus on? And as I wrestled and reflected on that, it seems to me that maybe the analogy, maybe the metaphor that we are supposed to see is not merely the storms, but to see ourselves in the boat, in the storm, and sailing, not on the Sea of Galilee, but the Sea of Life. You may recall in your confirmation or your Sunday school upbringing that the church is supposed to be a symbol of the ark. It's supposed to be a symbol of a ship, and you'll see stained glass with ships on them because the people of faith are in the boat. And they are sailing, they are navigating or trying to on the Sea of Life. And maybe, just maybe, that's where our minds and our faith and our hearts should look. Because all of us can relate to this story when we think about the storms we face in our own existence. Because everybody here knows you've been going and life is going smooth, and then all of a sudden chaos blows up around you. Things change instantaneously. You have to deal with stuff and garbage that you didn't see coming. Isn't that right? I mean, it happens. Life is what happens to you when you've made other plans. And often it is out of our control and it's chaotic. So what does this text have to say? What's Mark want us to think about? That's the challenge. So as I read it with that in mind, I thought to myself, well, it strikes me that all of this could have been avoided if Jesus and the disciples had just stayed on the west side of the lake. Did you think about that? There would have been no storm, there would have been no danger, there would have been no fear. None of that would have happened if they just stayed put. Stay in Magdala, have a good lunch. Go to Capernaum, relax, kick back at Peter's house. Go to Tiberias if you want. Have a good nightlife. But they didn't do that. They didn't stay put. They didn't stay where they were. Jesus called them to the other side. And they got in the boat and followed. All they had to do was sit tight, but oh no! they got to go to the other side. And it struck me, that's where Jesus always takes us. Jesus always takes us to the other side. The place where we are uncomfortable, the place where we cannot rest on our laurels and say this is the status quo, it's okay, it was this way once, it's going to always be this way, it's just the same, I'm going to stay right here. Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus is constantly pulling his followers into the boat that takes them out where it's dangerous and unknown, into places they have not yet experienced, but the gospel needs to go. That's why it upsets me sometimes, and I don't often, once in a while when I get really bored, I turn to the channels on TV and watch some of the people. If you ever want to make money as a preacher, all you got to do is buy airtime and come up with some crazy idea, and that's where the money seems to roll in, I can tell you. But it upsets me when I get on there and I hear people sell Christ like he's a drug or a panacea, that all you got to do is take this and get close to him and all your problems will go away and the tough stuff of your existence will just melt into non-existence. And that is not true. It's just not true. Because in reality, when one grows closer to Christ and your eyes of faith open up, all of a sudden life becomes even more challenging because you see things and you experience things and you say, that's not right, that shouldn't be that way. Life in many ways becomes more difficult because you are sensitive to stuff that you just walked by before. I think we were all rocked to our core in one way or another by the senseless shooting once again in Charleston. And of course, it hit closer to us at home because, as Jean said, we had a middle school youth group there, so we're concerned about them and what will happen. But it was also close to us because one of the people killed in that church was a cousin of a colleague of ours, a clergy in the national office of the United Church of Christ. So we had direct professional relations with folks who died in the faith in that place. And when these kinds of situations occur, I am struck by the notion that when this kind of stuff rears its head, there are two emotions that hit us. And the first one is fear, that we're going to run and we're going to hide. That's the first one. And the second one is anger. Anger that we want justice, but justice often clothed in retribution, because it really is anger at first. And both are understandable. I mean, they're both a part of being human. The fear and the anger are part of being human. But what I would submit to you is neither of those lead to a long-term resolution of the issues that we really face in this land. None of those things bring a better understanding between people of different backgrounds, ethnicities, races, political persuasions, and personal upbringing. We have ceased talking to each other and understanding one another. But we're really good at coming to false conclusions about others or assumptions about others. And nothing changes. There is no lasting peace, just chaos, the storm, until we do that. You see, that change only happens when people dare to get in the boat with Christ and open their eyes and go out on the stormy waters and bridge the gaps that work for a sense of mutuality that does bring about change. If you're not on the waters, they never get calmed. So if we want our lives to be undisturbed, if that's what you want in your life, you should stay where you are. Don't move. Don't ever move. But I got to tell you, that's not going to protect you or make you safe either. I would rather be in the old city of Jerusalem than I would be in a shopping mall in the United States these days. Don't think you'll be safe just because you sit still. The storms occur anywhere. But rather accept that following Christ is about daring to navigate through the storms. Ironically, finding peace, this peace Christ talks about, not because there is no threat. The word shalom, which in Hebrew means peace, does not mean that the word shalom in Hebrew is different than we use the word peace in English. In peace, the peace we know in the world is because this army is here and this army is here and they don't do anything because they're afraid of each other. That's the kind of peace we know. The peace that has police officers running around, right? The word shalom means the peace is so wonderful, you don't even need those things. You don't need police, you don't need armies, because people just get along. It is a vision, it is a dream, I understand, but we get a touch of that peace, that sense of wholeness, when we can go to bed at night and at least look ourselves in the mirror and say, we did all we could to make a difference and to make this world better. You see, and therein is the hope, that we don't give that up, that we don't let that go. And in so doing, having that hope and working for that kind of goal, what happens is we inspire other people. It's infectious. We inspire other people to work and to live and to claim the same. You know, if evil begets evil, then hope, faith, and goodness must do the same. They must do the same. On Thursday, Chris Singleton, the son of victim Sharonda Coleman Singleton, responded to the tragedy in Charleston by expressing his gratitude for those who reached out to him since his mother's death. And he said, "Love is always stronger than hate. So if we just loved the way my mom would, then the hate wouldn't be anywhere close to where love is." And he continued by saying, "We've come together as a community to try to get past these things, and tragedy has happened. But life is going to go on, and I believe things will get better." How do you not hear that from someone who just lost their mother and not have hope? Profound hope. Not false or phony hope, profound hope that speaks from the valley of the shadow. Walter Rauschenbusch helped me many years ago when I was wrestling with trying to figure out what's the difference between sin and evil. You know, we get them all muddled up and try to figure it out. And Rauschenbusch, a theologian of 100 years ago, said, well, this is the way it works. Sin is when I kill one Jew. That's my sin. Evil is when killing one Jew is acceptable by everybody. Do you understand? That's how a society goes. When doing the wrong thing is the acceptable thing, the normal thing, then it becomes evil and nobody has a handle on it anymore. So how do we get that handle? How do you stop it from getting to the point where it's chaotic? The storm is rolling. It was Edmund Burke, a British statesman, parliamentarian, orator, political thinker of the 18th century, who said this, and I think all of you probably know this quote. He said, "The only thing required for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." And of course, I would change that. The only thing necessary for the triumph of the evil is for good people to do nothing. We recognize the truth within this statement. But the quote of his that really sticks with me and challenges me as a people of faith is this one. Burke said that religion is essentially the art and the theory of the remaking of humankind. Because humankind is not a finished creation. Religion is essentially the art and theory of remaking of humankind because humankind is not done being created yet. Which may remind us as people of faith, challenge us as churches, that our primary calling as those who claim to follow Jesus is to remake humankind. To remake them in God's image. And friends, that's not a task. That's not a task for sprinters. That's a calling to those who run marathons. That's not a task for the faint-hearted, but one we pass on from generation to generation. You know, if you read the Ten Commandments, which one is it? Second one? Third one? I don't know. It just says, you shall not, a lot. Why? Because the sins of the parents are passed on to the third and fourth generation. At some point, the cycle has to stop. And you can't stop it by always being reactive. We have to figure out to be more proactive. Naive words. I know that. People say, well, you're just naive. Maybe. But then so is Jesus. Then so is Jesus. For in this world you have three great lasting qualities: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. We all know that even though Jesus calmed the storm on this one occasion, he kind of reprimanded the disciples for not having faith. He kind of scolds them about it. And you would think, wouldn't you, that if you were in a boat and there was big storms and all of a sudden it got calm, that would be enough, right? I'd be at the front of the boat believing. But the disciples seem to struggle again and again and again. And they frustrate Jesus, and I think they disappoint him in this regard. But I would like to think that later on, after Jesus is gone and they're on their own and they're all together, they looked at each other and they said, wow, this is a tough time, but remember that time we were with Jesus and we thought we were all going to drown? Do you remember that time? Do you remember how Jesus stood beside us in the midst of that storm and got us through? He set at rest, not just the waves around us, he set at rest the anxieties and fears within us. We found our center, we got our plumb line, we got our equilibrium of faith and peace once again. And they recalled Jesus' words. Because Jesus said to them, I have spoken these things that you might have peace, not as the world has peace, but as I would give you peace. For in this world you will have tribulation. But be of good cheer, do not despair. I have overcome the world, and you shall too. So my prayer for all of us is that this story reassures us of this eternal truth once again, that there is hope, and that hope calls us to service, and that chaos cannot win and death does not have the final word. That we hear that truth today once again. But more importantly, that we hear that word tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. That we have the hope and the courage required to run the good race and to fight the good fight and to finish the course, as Paul says, in faith. Amen.